Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm slightly frustrated just the diversity of opinions here, Mr. Chairman. At some point, I'd like to be able to have more time because we have such a wide variety of different folks that are here. But thanks all for your service and for being here in the process. Let me run quickly through several questions on this. Mr. Wilson, let me first start with you in this. Trying to be able to deal with the role that you have in protecting intellectual property and this unique task on this. The Biden administration so far, one of the leading features they've had on intellectual property was trying to be able to give away intellectual property dealing with the TRIPS waiver. Obviously, Europe, multiple other entities have pushed back on that. Other countries are saying, yes, release intellectual property. We'll try to figure out how to be able to manufacture this. What would be your role in trying to be able to protect intellectual property of all American companies?
Thank you, Senator Lankford. As I mentioned in my opening statement, I think the law that creates this position gives me a very clear direction that being a vigorous advocate for U.S. Intellectual property and innovation is the core of the function, and I take that to heart and would follow that guidance if confirmed. It's useful for me to have your perspective on the TRIPS waiver issue. As somebody inside the walls of USTR but not yet confirmed to this position, I've taken care to remove myself from active policy deliberations on that issue. But if I'm confirmed, obviously we'll prioritize getting up to speed on that issue on the state of play in Geneva, and happy to come back to you.
There are quite a few other areas of a lot of research, and if we get into a point where we say, you know what, the whole world needs this, so let's just release this intellectual property, then we're going to have a cascading effects on other intellectual property. Finding ways to accelerate its usefulness and its accessibility is very different than just, that's a great invention you had, we're going to take it away from you. That doesn't encourage innovation in the days ahead. So we'll count on your leadership to protect that, both in China and what they actively do, but around the world as well. Mr. Newman, let me ask you about this, about Afghanistan in particular. There's $9.5 billion that have been set aside and frozen out from the Taliban government at this point. Do you see a need to be able to unfreeze that $9.5 billion and release it to the Taliban?
Thank you for your question, Senator Lankford. The situation in Afghanistan is of course, really terrible, and my heart goes out to the Afghan people. There's a real humanitarian crisis there, and we should do all that we can to try to help the Afghan people, for example, working with our partners in the UN and trying to get funding to people on the ground at this point without having that funding flow through the Taliban. Right now, my understanding is that the Treasury Department, the Fed is taking, the U.S. government is taking a strategic pause or a pause, not granting access to those reserves to the Taliban while the international community waits and sees how they respond to our concerns on treatment of women, treatment of girls, and I do find that appropriate at this time.
That would
Senator.
be entirely appropriate. Actually, would you favor special drawing rights in the International Monetary Fund if it actually gets to the Taliban?
I similarly, at this stage, think that the paused relationship between the IMF membership and the Taliban, so they don't currently have access to their SDR allocation at the IMF, is appropriate.
Thank you. I agree. Mr. Is it Bagininstos? Pronounce it for me so I get it right.
Bagenstas.
Thank you. I apologize for mispronouncing that. I don't ever intend to be able to do that for anyone on this.
Oh,
You're
no.
walking into a role as counsel with HHS, extremely important role for all of our counsels. There's no way you could know at this point unless someone had told you at this point. We've sent some letters to Secretary Becerra asking some very specific questions. In fact, we outlined 22 questions. He sent us a very nice letter back saying thanks for writing. But has not answered any of the 22 questions as we've gone through. Even some things that he stated in the actual nomination hearing when he came through here, things like, are you going to recuse yourself from cases that you were named in as a California AG, but now you're on the other side of it when he's literally suing HHS. Now he's on the other side of it. So he said, nope, not going to do that. So we asked, just can you give us a list of the cases you're going to recuse yourself from? He hasn't even turned over that list of cases that he will recuse himself from, even though he said it during his testimony time sitting at that same table. So are you aware of that? Has that been brought to your attention at this point? Is there a need to be able to get that kind of list when he has filed so many suits against HHS that now he then is on the other side of it?
Thank you, Senator. I very much appreciate the question and take very seriously the responsibility to be responsive to Congress and this committee. And I can tell you, should I be confirmed to the position of General Counsel, one of the functions of the General Counsel's office is the ethics function at HHS, including monitoring appropriate recusals, and will certainly take seriously the ethics rules in that regard and responsiveness to this.
We will count on that, because one of the very first things that happened then from HHS was when they dropped a lawsuit that HHS had against the state of California. Was one of the early statements, but we've yet to be able to get any clarity whether the secretary was actually involved in dropping the case against his own state right after he got into office. To be able to clear that up, or to be able to deal with the University of Vermont Medical Center, who had a clear conscience protection issue that was placed against them, that then the administration came in and dropped immediately and said, no, we're not going to prosecute that out. And we also don't know for University of Pittsburgh. There have been some real questions there about how they've handled some of the abortion issues that they've dealt with, where they're literally harvesting and changing the procedures for an abortion, which is against federal law to be able to harvest those organs. The written statements we've seen seem to show they have, but we can't seem to get any information to be able to continue where there's a violation of federal law. Those are things that we're going to want to ask in the days ahead and be able to get clarity on.
All right. Thank you, Senator.
Thank my colleague.